Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Philp, and I'm the Partnership Director at Portugal Pathways and your host for today's webinar. Welcome to this webinar. It's regarding planning and structuring your income and assets to mitigate progressive tax rates of between 28 and 48% after your NHR tax status expires. This webinar follows on from a recent Wealthy Expats survey report just published, which stated that only 27% of existing NHR tax holders had planned for the challenge of structuring their income and assets in the right way early enough into their NHR tax status life. I do apologise. We will touch on what's going on with the tax status for new entrants and this impending deadline at the end of December 2023, set by the Portuguese government, which is causing significant anxiety and stress for many. It was reported in the media recently this week that the Portuguese visa, immigration and tax offices were merging whilst this was all going on, leaving an unprecedented 350,000 visa applications to be processed. These actions are creating a perfect storm as people navigate towards their new life in Portugal. We will debate and hear from our expert panelists on these subjects, and we will look forward to many questions coming from you guys into the chat during the hour-long webinar. But those two things I mentioned have been dominating the news recently when it comes to NHR tax status. The backlog of visa applications is causing delays in processing new NHR tax status applications, and the Portuguese government need to give clarity to the professional supply chain, such as law firms, tax advisors, visa application specialists, wealth management companies, real estate and property developers, so that they can best advise their customers with confidence and certainty. We have seen thousands of applications continue to stream in, as Portugal is still one of the world's leading places to relocate and invest. And these current bureaucratic challenges are not diminishing people's determinations to make this move. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our expert panel who'll be sharing their thoughts on these matters. But as I said before, please don't hesitate to leave your questions, comments in the chat. We will endeavour to get back to all of you during obviously the webinar. Any that we don't get back to, we will get back to you in due course via our website. So I'd like to introduce to you our panel. This includes Paul Stannard. So Paul is the non-exec chairman at Portugal Pathways, and he is an international entrepreneur, tech and media and investment expert. Joining Paul is Jeffrey Graham. Jeffrey is a Portuguese lawyer and English solicitor, and he leads a specialist tax department at Edge International Lawyers. With offices in Portugal, they are a full-service law firm. And Jeffrey is ideally placed to take us through some of the discussion points and challenges that we're talking about today. And finally, we have David Vacani. David is chairman of the Federation of European Independent Financial Advisors and owner of Beacon Global. He is based in Portugal and is an expert in advising affluent expats and high net worth families in structuring their wealth and investments. He has decades of experience as an expert in international cross-border investment planning and wealth management. So before we get going, I just want to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Portugal Pathways YouTube channel and website later today. And as I've said previously, we'd encourage you to leave questions in the chat. So I've introduced you to the panel, but we want to hear a little bit more about them and their experiences and obviously the organisations that they represent. So I'm just going to invite Jeffrey just to give an overview on those elements.
Sure. Thank you very much, Steve. And welcome everyone. I think it's very interesting to see such interest in what's happening at the moment in Portugal. Obviously, it has been a centre of interest for many individuals who are looking to relocate for lifestyle reasons and also tax reasons. But we Edge are very much, this is our specialist area in looking after clients who are looking to make that relocation move. So it says we're full service and therefore we at Edge effectively look after the client from the beginning of the journey to the end in all of their legal needs, whether that be through obtaining residency, registering as tax resident, tax planning, and indeed the purchase of real estate. And amazingly, as life goes on, these clients evolve and they wish to enter into commercial investments in Portugal, so we can also assist with that together with the associated private client work. So I've been here for 23 years. As Steve said, I'm qualified in the UK, or in England and Wales and Portugal, also registered in Ireland. And I think that, I suppose, I made my move also for lifestyle reasons. Whilst there wasn't a nice tax soft landing at that stage, I feel that Portugal still has a huge amount to offer, even post NHR. So obviously there's been a lot of noise regarding the announcement which was made, I suppose, which surprised us all on the 2nd of October by the Portuguese Prime Minister António Costa on a live interview, similar to what was the announcement which was made at the Web Summit regarding the Golden Visa itself. However, I think that we now have a little bit more clarity as to what is actually going to change. Or do we? Because we're probably only going to find out on the 29th of November what these changes are actually going to look like, when they're going to be placed on the statute book, and whether there will be any alterations from the announcement as opposed to what comes into force by law. But probably enough from me, I'd say at the moment, Steve. I mean, I'm happy to come back to some of those points, both regarding not only the changes to the NHR, but also the new tax incentivized status, which the government is offering from 2024 onwards. But I'll let someone else kind of take the podium, if you like, now, and maybe say a little bit about the context of the webinar as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. Yeah, we've got plenty of questions coming in already. And a number of them allude to the points that you've made, so I'm sure we'll be revisiting those in due course. Just to go around the room a little bit more and hear a bit more from the panelists. David, I mean, you have a dual role. You wear two hats. Just talk to us about your experience with sort of wealthy families and obviously navigating the NHR tax regime from a financial point of view.
I think the main thing, and good morning, everybody, the main thing is to do things properly. And I think that's absolutely highlighted there by what Jeffrey was saying, and actually taking full advice, proper advice. Portugal's a wonderful place to live. Hopefully it will still exist after the 31st of December 2023. I'm sure it will. People were moving there before NHR existed, and they will move there afterwards. So I don't think we should see that as a be-all and end-all of everything. It's obviously an important thing, and if it can be facilitated at the moment, that's it. I moved down to Portugal a few years ago. I've been working in investment management, wealth management for more years than I care to remember. I've been working in the international space for about 20 years now, actually. So we've been working there. And basically, I would always say is every situation, every person, every client is different. Everything needs to be tailored and looked at individually from wherever, whether it's an EU citizen, someone from the UK, people from the States, people from other parts of the wide world. So everything is individual, everything is different. So it is about planning. One size doesn't fit all, and the ability to use specialists is very important, and to get your sort of situation sorted and ducks in a row. So that's, I think, most important thing to do, and take good advice, and don't try. And as I say, we said before on one or two of these talks before, is once you become Portuguese tax resident, whether that's under NHR or will be under the ITS scheme, or is that you need to be thinking and structuring yourself like a Portuguese person. And that's actually the most important thing, particularly once you become tax resident, obviously. Thanks,
Dave. That's great insight. And as I said, I'm looking at the questions. We're going to be coming back to many of those points in due course. So, Paul, over to you. So, tell us a little bit about yourself and Portugal Pathways, and tell us a little bit about, some of the surveys and some of the reports that that you've been sort of seeing over the last weeks or two?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, obviously I'm here as chairman of Portugal Pathways, and you know, the first thing I'd really like to say, really, we've been inundated over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and there's one sort of common theme, which is a little bit of panic, and some of it unnecessary panic, in that people don't truly understand what NHR is, and whether it's right for them or whatever's going to replace it is better for them. And in a lot of circumstances, people ask, well, give me an exact answer. And the exact answer pertains to their exact situation. So without understanding fully, you know, what their situation is, you know, people like Jeffrey and David, it's very difficult to give specific answers to an email or even some of these chat questions, because the answer to one person is going to be very different to the other. And the one thing I would say, you know, we've been involved with this recent piece of research, the Wealthy Expats report, and the really encouraging thing is that 89% of people interviewed said they were coming for lifestyle reasons, not just for the tax. But the incentives are still going to be strong. There's many other benefits, you know, in terms of gift tax, in terms of inheritance, and what is being proposed, and it's only a draft, and I'd be interested to hear a bit more what's going to happen on the 29th of November, whether there'll be any changes to the draft. But basically, they're still looking to incentivize people, and the profile of people that are still coming, you know, they're film directors, they're bankers, they're tech people, they're AI people, they're bringing value to the country, and they're bringing assets and income that can, bring wealth. And I'm sure the Portuguese government are not going to want to miss out on the value-added tax that these people bring, that also help the economy.
Oh, thanks for that, Paul. I mean, that was really enlightening, and obviously it seems to have resonated with the audience, as we've got a lot of questions coming in now. I know that the World Digital Foundation had produced a report recently, which obviously Portugal Pathways covered in their last webinar. And one of the most striking things that came out of that report was that obviously only 27% of wealthy expats had structured their finances beyond the initial 10 years. And really, I wanted to ask the panel that particular question, why they thought maybe that number was so low. And what actions do we think that obviously expats currently within the NHR should take? I'll start with you, David. First of all, why do you think that number is so low amongst
I don't know. I think maybe people hadn't even realised about it and hadn't sort of perceived that. I know very early days of NHR. I think Jeffrey would probably remember that most of the people that moved to Portugal with early NHR were the French, actually, and I think obviously perhaps looking to get some slightly lower tax rates than those which were applicable in France for their pension funds. I think in terms of I don't know, I don't know the exact answer to that. It's, I guess, with all these things, it's knowledge and lifestyle, and it's not always convenient for people to move to different countries and up sticks, whether that's for family reasons, work reasons, or whatever. So a number of those. In terms of planning, it's if those people who already got NHR or who already tax resident, it's important. There are certain ways, whether it's with investments or pensions, planning that are ideal and assist in a very tax efficient way to take income in the future and to have your fund investment rolled up. And now whether that's from an income perspective or future for a succession planning or inheritance planning. So I think those are sort of key elements for us. I don't think we plan on going through all of that now, because we could do 2.5 hours on that, and that probably wouldn't be very popular. But certainly in terms of investment planning, it's sorting out your income so that you have tax efficient income and the like for going forward. And that's whether it's investments and pensions. And again, just to sort of reiterate, things like if you're from the UK, things like ISAs don't work in Portugal. They're not there to, they're a UK based system. So it's a matter of having those investments which work well in Portugal and which work within the Portuguese system. And that's obviously where we can, assist.
Brilliant. Thanks.
I mean, picking up what David just said, in reality, people don't know what they don't know. And people go there and they say, oh, I've got this low tax regime, and they're getting on with their lives. Unless someone shows them what the future can look like. And that's why it's important that, there are great advisors like Edge, like David's company, BG Wealth, and many others aside that can support people not only in their journey to Portugal, but actually structuring things and planning things for not just the 10 years of NHR, but way beyond that.
Yeah. So I think the important takeaway from that then is that it's never too early to start planning. Obviously, you don't get caught into a situation where you're entering the final years and you haven't obviously structured to mitigate those taxes. So
I think, sorry, Steve, just to interject, and I think that, and I'm sure Jeffrey would underline this, and is that, if you're making a decision to move to another country, I did it initially for lifestyle, to actually live in Portugal and enjoy the benefits that Portugal have. If there are other things that are beneficial for that in terms of good tax structure, along with really nice climate, lovely people, great food, and quite a lot of nice golf courses, that's a bonus as well. And that's the thing to look at in Duke as well. But it's kind of looking, people should be looking to move for the right reasons, not just not for any other, not just for tax reasons.
Okay.
No, 100%, I'd agree with that. I think that certainly a huge component of the reason we help so many people move to Portugal is the lifestyle. That's really one of the driving factors. And I think that what we've seen with our business is that it has become really a global business as a result of the incentivization, if you like, of Portugal as a destination. Portugal's now on the high net worth map. Now, it's not only just geared for high net worth. I think that's really important to emphasize. But it is on the map on that map, which it wouldn't have been on maybe even 5 years ago. So as a result, to allude to what Paul has said about the profile of the people which the country is attracting. But equally, and I'll come back to my point about the fact Portugal has got something for everyone. And I think that part of what we do is it's a kind of something which David has been emphasizing is a look before you leap kind of approach, in the sense that the earlier you plan, and as Paul has said, the better. I don't see that approach as changing in the sense that, for the clients we are dealing with at the moment who want to activate their NHR, and I see a couple of questions about whether specifically it's too late or not. I'll come on to that. But I think that ultimately it is about seeing whether NHR fits, because it's not a program whereby all of your income is exempt. It's not the case. The other thing is that the NHR is not a visa. It's a tax program. It doesn't provide residency status, and therefore has to be combined with a visa, or indeed your right to reside as a European national, in order to actually apply for a tax program as well. So it is, and just because it's coming to an end doesn't mean that it fits. We've got to do our planning. We've got to see whether, in fact, you will benefit under the program, the degree to which you will. But that exercise will continue after the 31st of December of this year. So even if the changes stay as they are, our exercise of helping clients plan, and David's as well, will continue, in the sense that we'll be able to emphasize the benefits of certain types of insurance product. We'll be able to emphasize the benefits of the succession tax program, which is a territorial tax and is an exemption for spouse and ascendants and descendants. So all of these things, and gift tax as well, under the same principles. So all of these things we will maybe be able to emphasize for those who are looking to obviously coming to Portugal for a lifestyle reason, but yes, they're not going to be punished, if you like, for becoming a Portuguese tax resident, because actually there's a way to structure your wealth in a way which will continue for it to be tax efficient to draw on it.
I've been on a few calls recently. A lot of Americans, so I must get on NHR, I must get an NHR. And actually, and it does depend on their individual circumstances, but when you get their tax advice from the US and a Portuguese tax advisor and someone like David, in terms of looking at the structure, when you look at it in the cold light of day, many of them, you know, are not affected at all and sometimes better off.
I think that's a very good point, and George, you know, you guys would have. And each situation is individual, and one size doesn't fit all with all of these things, whether it's in investment, whether it's pensions, whether it's tax. And as Jeffrey rightly says, NHR is a tax situation, it's not a visa. And I think the important thing there is that you need to be do everything for the right reason. Once you decided, yeah, this is the life we want to follow, then there's then that's the way to start planning. And there are still very good, even if you miss out on NHR for certain reasons, there's certainly really good ways of structuring yourself so that you can still benefit all the elements that you might like in Portugal, not just because of NHR.
Brilliant. Well, I said the questions are flying in from the audience, but before we get to those, we have a few questions posed by the audience when they actually registered. And I can see from the poll that we've just conducted that primarily in the audience, we have sort of three groups today. Those that are currently on the NHR, those that are applying for NHR, and those that are thinking of applying. So we'll endeavour to sort of find relevant questions that the panelists can answer to sort of satisfy each group. I can see that there's a lot of specific questions around specific needs and circumstances from individuals. And again, if we don't get to those today, we will get back to you guys, obviously, post the webinar. So let's start with the question for those of you that are actively pursuing NHR tax status. And this one is from Camille, and she's in the US. And she asks, what are some of the things I can do to expedite my NHR application process? She has an NIF, she has a Portuguese bank account, but she's unsure if she needs a proof of address in Portugal. Jeffrey, do you want to sort of take that one?
Sure. Steve, yeah, I mean, you do need an address in Portugal, whether that be a property which you own or indeed you rent. However, a critical point being a US national is that you actually need a residency visa. So that's the starting point. The starting point is that if you want to register as an NHR, a tax resident, and then NHR, because the two are sequential, then you need to either have a residency visa or a European passport, which we can then help the client turn into a right to reside document. If you don't have either of those two things, then if you are, for example, applying for a D7 visa and you have a stamp on your passport, effectively for the temporary visa, then we would say you would have a good chance of being able to register as a tax resident. Anything else less than that, it becomes increasingly difficult to register as a tax resident. And if we go right to the worst case scenario, if you like, of having done nothing at all, I would say, despite what other advisors may say, I would say it would be very, very difficult at this stage, being the 7th of November, with the changes due to come into force as of the 1st of January. I would say it'd be very, very difficult to register you as a tax resident. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there would be certainly a degree of risk, and quite a high degree of risk, of being able to do that. Therefore, for the person who's raised the question, I think there's a pre-question to that, which is, I'm sure you've done your homework, etc., but get a tax report. Figure out, actually, as a US citizen, if in fact you'll at least be in the tax neutral position, because really what US citizens, the best they can benefit not the best they can benefit, but one of the major things they can benefit from under the programme is, first of all, the exercise of the double taxation agreement between Portugal and the US and using tax credits in the appropriate way. And then secondly, the ability to stop paying state tax. Federal tax will obviously follow you as a US citizen. Therefore, it's really important to get that tax advice so that you know when it comes to 2024, when you've got to do your first tax return on the basis you register this year and tax years thereafter, you know exactly what you're going to declare and what rate of tax that you're going to pay on it, presumably zero, but best to find out first.
But Paul or David, anything to add to that particular one?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Jeffrey's saying there. You know, you've got to. It comes back to this same thing, planning. But anybody that sort of hasn't already started down that process, and you know, have already got a long way. They've got their NIF, they've got their proof of residency, they've got a Portuguese bank account, and they've actually, got a SEF appointment, may have some chance. But if you're not, then, it might not be the end of the world to wait to the new regime and come through that route.
Okay, brilliant. So another question coming in, I think this one's from the perspective, Steve is actually a current NHR expat. So this one again, I'm going to point this one to David. So he asked, what are the pros and cons of different investment options for expats in Portugal? He's heard that trusts don't work here in Portugal. David, can you sort of enlighten him?
Fundamentally, trusts are very different from if you're in the UK and other parts of the world to Portugal and Western Europe. Generally, in Western Europe, people tend to look straight through a trust at the ultimate beneficial owner of that. So they basically ignore the wrapper and the trust wrapper on that. So if you have a pension scheme, for example, you would want what we would know as a contract-based pension scheme rather than what you would have in the UK, which is which would be a normal sort of pension scheme trust. Those things are just very different although they'll look the same, they'll feel the same, but they are fundamentally very different things. So trusts aren't the best thing in the world, and particularly in Western Europe, as I say, because the tax authorities tend to look all the way through the trust and see who's at the bottom of it and then levy tax on them. There are, as we sort of mentioned in outline earlier on, basically one of the best ways of investing money when you are in Portugal and looking for is through, like Jeffrey mentioned earlier on, an insurance-based system. And insurance-based systems are very different to that which we would know, which you'd know in the UK, maybe in Ireland and other places. But the way that it works is a system of tax deferral over a number of years. And I noticed one of the questions, sorry, Steve, there was one of the questions about why should I, from someone called Carol, who said, why should I act early? Basically, under life assurance-based investments, and I say, don't think of these as what you would know as a life assurance policy in UK, Ireland, US, etc., is basically that the longer you hold those investments, the lower the marginal rate of tax is. In Portugal, you basically are taxed, or when you take money out of these or income from these types of investments, you are taxed only on the profit-based element of what you withdraw. In the first 4 years, that it works out at about 28% on the profit. Years 5 to 8, 22.4%, again on the profit, and then after year 8 is 11.2%. So without trying to give you too much, so as you can see, the potential tax rate drops the longer you hold the investment. So in essence, just in question on there, Carol, and obviously to Steve's question there is, if you structure these things properly and structure, and the other thing very much to say is they need to be Portuguese compliant and mustn't be sort of esoteric sort of tax haven type places. So places like the Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey do not work. You need to be in EU solutions with Portuguese tax compliance. And obviously that's something we can help you with and show you what to do.
David, is that the same for US?
US is slightly different because such investments are not always treated, are not treated the same in the US. So it's very much a matter of looking at the individual, where they're still taxed. And obviously, under US, you are a citizen. US citizen, you have to pay tax across the world. And typically, this type of investment doesn't always work that well in the US. But again, it's really a matter of having to look at each individual's circumstance.
Thanks, David. We've got one from Alvarez, and I think this is a really hot question and really apt for the moment. And I appreciate that obviously we can't maybe give specifics, but he's sort of asking, is there a deadline for applying for the NHR before December the 31st? Paul, you've been speaking to lots of providers out in Portugal. What's the general consensus out there that haven't yet made that first step but are aware of the deadline of the 31st? Is there a deadline? And again, Jeffrey can probably come in behind you on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think Jeffrey mentioned this earlier. It depends whether you're already an EU citizen, because that gives you an advantage because you don't have the same challenge with the visa elements that if you were coming from the US or whatever. But the one thing I would say in terms of the process, people are getting a little bit too self-obsessed with that deadline and need to look back at their personal circumstances and get a report on that before they're chasing a supposed name in NHR like it's some spiritual thing. and really they should be just looking at getting tax advice, understanding exactly what their assets, their income is, and making an informed decision from there rather than chasing this NHR deadline, this mystical deadline. I mean, David and Jeffrey, you may have more to say on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say sooner the better, simply because just to get a little bit, I'm not going to get too much into the granular, but even if you have all of your documents in place and or we assist with that, obtaining your documents, and that includes, I have to remind you, is either a residency card, passport, which will then require a certificate, together with a residential address in Portugal and proof of it. Basically, there's a process after that, and this is on the basis all reporting has been done and you've given the green light as an applicant. And the process can involve 2 to 3 weeks. Now, that's quite quick, but given the fact that we are, as I say, on the 7th of November, that's kind of taking us towards the end of November. So very soon it's going to come to a point where it's going to become very difficult to register as an NHR before this deadline. Now, again, flip back, it is the 29th of November that the budget is due to be debated. But waiting until the 29th of November is probably going to be a little bit too late if you want to act now, and certainly if you want to start the reporting or considering whether it's a good fit. So, look, I have to say the sooner the better. I think what you'll also find, we're not obviously the only professional provider out there, but I'd say all of them would be saying the same thing, which is that they've been inundated with potential inquiries, and therefore it will be dealt with on a first come, first served basis. Therefore, the sooner you can get through the reporting stage, well, actually, the sooner you can actually work out whether you qualify under the requirements. If you qualify, then go through the reporting stage, the better.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I can back that up. There are many professional firms in the supply chain that are really nervous about taking people on because also they don't want to create unreal expectations because they're not in control of the visa process. That's the government, and they can only offer best endeavours in this process, which adds an additional layer of pressure to them that they shouldn't have the burden of, really. And I think that's making, you know, a lot of the supply chain sort of nervous about taking more people on.
Okay, thank you, Paul. As I said, we are getting inundated with questions, and a lot of these questions are very specific to the individual needs. And I'm just trying to pick my way through to find some questions that that you guys could answer. I've got one here from Tom. So Tom is his question, and I think we'll put this to Jeffrey. It's just moved. So he said, what if he stops being a Belgian tax resident, becomes a Portuguese tax resident, but my NHR is declined? So he's asking, would it have any consequences on his Portuguese taxes?
His NHR won't be declined if we can successfully register him as a tax resident. I mean, we have a 100% success rate. We've yet to have a problem with a client being declined for being NHR, being registered as NHR. The only circumstances where we've seen that happen would be, for example, if they've previously been registered as a Portuguese tax resident in the previous 5 years. So it's only in anomalies like that that we've seen the NHR application being rejected. Therefore, I don't think that Tom should worry about that. I'm just seeing another question, Steve. I hope you don't mind if I take that one as well, because it's a question interestingly about the new program. And so effectively that I'm based in the US, I've read that the proposed incentivized tax scheme might be as good as the NHR for me. Again, that basically depends upon your individual circumstances. What I can tell you about the new program is that first of all, it has not been set in stone, but the proposal is, first of all, there would be a 50% exemption on salary income, consulting income, up to the level of €250,000 for a period of 5 years, provided that the individual registers as tax resident on or before 2016. And then secondly, that there would be a special 20% rate of tax together with an exemption on passive income for research and technology-based professions. Now, I've gone through the proposal in quite some detail, and there is still quite a lot of clarity that's required and definition. Now, there is talk and pressure for this to be improved. It certainly will have to be better defined. Certainly before it goes on the statute book. But I don't consider this an NHR light program. This is going to be only applicable to a small minority of people, in my opinion. I think there's a reasonable chance that this might be broadened, so that it could apply to a bigger potential applicant qualification. But we'll just have to wait and see. That said, I also hope that good sense will prevail. Portugal obviously is a lifestyle hub, but it's also what makes it quite nice for people to move over gently and have a soft landing is because of the tax program itself. So what I'm hoping is that some of those details get ironed out, and the new program will be have a lot more traction than the way it's being presented at the moment.
Great.
Yeah, having looked at the draft bill myself and the notes they put out, there are some vagaries in there. And as you say, it does need to, people want clarity, but I think, I hope that some common sense will be applied, because it's in the Portuguese government's interest as much as it is the people that want to come.
Absolutely. One here from Alvarez, to sort of follow it on. So he's saying, surely the Portuguese government have a fair and reasonable to penalise people who have been planning for their future in Portugal for 18 months or more, and make major financial commitments without the knowledge of this deadline being imposed against the backdrop of the 350,000 visa applications? Quite a long question. What are the legal implications to the Portuguese government? Should I seek redress for losing my investment through no fault of my own? So what he's saying is obviously he started the process a long time out, and he's obviously, you know, in some kind of sort of financial discomfort. Is there any kind of redress, you know, that he can take? Should he be?
I can't see it, really. I mean, I can understand. I was just having a call yesterday with some US potential clients who were in exactly the same position and who are now considering having to accelerate their NHR applications despite their own individual business situation, which doesn't really suit it. That's governments, I'm afraid. You know, rules change, tax programs come to an end, investment programs come to an end, residency programs come to an end. You know, I think what's important to say is that the government have been quite careful about the way that they've implemented this, because they haven't touched existing NHRs. So what they've said about the existing NHRs is that they will be effectively grandfathered and they will continue to benefit from the program until the end of the 10 years. And I fully expect that to be borne out in the final law itself. So compensation for a program which you weren't able to benefit from because the law changed, that would be very difficult sort of action to pursue. So I'm afraid there's not really a lot of redress. Only redress you may have is trying to get under the umbrella before the end of the 31st of December, before the 31st of December of the NHR, or seeking to take advantage of the new program.
And in terms of another question here from Frank, he's suggesting, he's asking, sorry, does it matter what profession him and his wife are in when obviously applying? They're both doctors. Would that in any way boost them at all, or accelerate their application?
Again, no, Steve. It's where that's the profession is important, is bearing out in terms of the type of visa which is being applied for, and it's not so much the profession as the regular nature of income being received, for example, under the D7 visa. I think where the profession can be interesting under the existing program is that there is a special rate of 20% for certain qualified professionals. That can also operate as an exemption in certain circumstances, depending upon the way the income is paid, whether that be salary or consulting income, whether it's taxed at source, and whether there's a fixed place to practice that profession from another country. Again, that's something we report on. So being a doctor, I think one thing actually I think is quite important to emphasize is that as far as the NHR is concerned, there's no minimum investment requirement. So you don't have to invest X, Y, or Z, and neither do you actually have to have a certain profession. The important part of your profession is whether you will benefit to the greatest degree under that program, and it's only a tax report or reporting that will be able to answer that question.
Okay. A few questions coming in from a wealth management point of view, which I'll put to David. One from Veronique. She's saying that during the NHR status, is it a good idea to organise a life insurance wrapper for people coming in from Switzerland? Whether that's specific to Switzerland, I'm not too sure. But David, is that something you could?
Yeah, going very much back to what we said earlier on, you have to consider yourself to, move into the Portuguese system. I'm sure Jeffrey would agree with that. It's basically, you need to look at why you've made a decision to move to Portugal. What is the way of investing properly? Obviously, Switzerland is different to Portugal. We need to, one would need to know what the aims and the goals of the person are. That's a very broad thing and a bit of planning there. But certainly, basically, as we know, and there's a follow-up question from a couple of other people I noticed on the chat, it's if you are NHR, you have NHR, and you are, say, you've got your tax residency and you're resident in Portugal, you need to look at what tax system works, what investment system works best for you in Portugal. Typically, that is a sort of a life insurance structure. There are other investment things that one needs to consider as well. But the life insurance structure with a Portuguese compliant solution offers significant tax benefits for an individual. So it would be just consider that. But the answer probably is yes. Very long way of saying the answer is probably yes. But I say each person is different. I noticed with someone else just following on Veronique, saying that they're a number of years into life insurance investment on an Isle of Man platform. Again, it's really looking at what's there at the moment, how it's invested, what any tax consequences are of changing that, and then looking at new solutions applicable so that you get efficient tax treatment in Portugal.
David, sorry, Steve, I was just going to say, David, on that, what's the normal process for the audience looking? So would they need to get on a call with someone like yourselves and a tax advisor together, or you first and then a tax advisor? What's the process to get that structure and planning?
Basically, what we would normally do is sift and work through. So there are solutions available. So initially we can do a call, a Zoom call, obviously, for an initial discussion. If there is then a need for specific tax advice, or legal advice, then we work with our sort of trusted partners for that individual. So we know we are not specifically tax advisors, although we know an awful lot of tax. So we can certainly guide an individual, and then if there are some specific issues that need to be dealt with, at that point, then we can introduce them to one of our tax advisors, who are Portuguese specialists, and we also have specialists obviously back in the UK, Ireland, and throughout Europe, and obviously with the US as well. We work with some tax barristers in the US as well.
Again, we're sort of drawing to the end of the webinar. I know that the guys themselves on the panel want to have a chance to sort of give their takeaways. Just a couple more questions, obviously from the chat. We started off by talking about the need to obviously plan early if you're currently on an NHR and obviously in Portugal. So Caroline again has asked here, 4 years into the NHR. I know we've talked about obviously planning early, but how she's asking, how can I minimize my tax liability when my status expires?
Basically, it's there, as I say, it's actually going back to a little bit what we've just said there over the last few minutes, is that there are some specific investment types, these insurance-based product investments for one, which give you particularly efficient ways of investing money and taking income, and also actually succession planning as well. So that needs to be looked at, but those, as I said earlier on, they give some, and I think we just gave an example there of the potential tax rates under this type of investments going down the line. So we can give you a little bit more detail, Caroline, on that going forward. And we've got some specific tax examples on comparing, it's called compliant Portuguese investments with non-compliant investments, and more than happy to provide those to you.
Interestingly, I had a call with someone the other day, and they compared NHR to like someone giving you an interest-free credit card, only to find out if you don't pay it back on year 10, suddenly you're going to be paying 48%. Whereas if you structure it, I assume, through someone like David and tax advice through Jeffrey, then you plan, and if the interest on, say, an insurance wrapper the tax you're paying is only on the profit, then you could over 20 years, pay a sensible figure, because we've all got to pay tax, but not actually, boom and bust scenario.
So we're sort of drawing now towards the end, and again, a lot of these questions are really specific to people's own circumstances. As I said, we will get back to all of you, so fear not. I suppose one final question from me before we sort of wrap up and go to the panel for their sort of takeaways. In reality, is it already too late for some people to apply for the NHR? Because of the backlog challenge, or do you think the government might see sense and give some kind of extension to those that maybe have acted in good faith with their applications? Is that something that you could see happening at this stage, Jeffrey?
I think it's hard to say, Steve. I mean, I think that the doors, as I said, is quite rapidly shutting. I think for those who have done nothing at all in terms of a residency program, very difficult indeed. There is already a dispensation for those involved in the residency process with a valid residency process in place by the end of the year. That there could be a dispensation to the end of March. Whether that will be extended or not, we just need to see. There's been a lot of noise about that, and the noise specifically has been generated as a result of the somewhat backlash, shall we say, regarding the announcement for the NHR status itself coming to an end. So I think if I were a sensible person in government, then what I'd be looking at would be trying to open up, given all of those delays which you initially mentioned, I have to say, Steve, I'd be looking to open up the possibility of actually maybe giving a little bit of an extension to the deadline for those who actually are actively pursuing a residency process itself.
Paul,
Yeah,
David,
I think that morally and sensibly from their point of view, if people have actually done everything they could do, it's really, they're not going to, I can't see them helping people that haven't helped themselves. Because if people have done everything they could do, they're in the system, they took the effort to go and get a bank account set up, they have a proof of address, they have the NIP, they've done their application, they're waiting for an appointment. Those people, it would be hopeful, and I know we can't guarantee it, but morally it would be hopeful that they would give an extension to those people, perhaps.
Great. Thank you, guys. Give them some hope there. That's great. So we're going to wrap up. So I'm just going to go around the room and I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to leave us with that major takeaway from the audience, to take away from obviously what they've heard today. So I'm going to start with you, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to hone in on what basically Jeffrey and David talked about earlier is about structure and planning, and just making sure if you're already on NHR that you're talking to someone like David, which we get, or Jeffrey, in terms of getting exactly where your tax is and what your assets and income is, and making sure that you sit down and work out what that looks like for the long term, not just the 10 years, but do that early. And the other thing that I would say is, if you haven't acted now, I saw that there was something in the chat, Steve, where there was what you should do if you're an EU citizen and what have you. I think, have a look at that and see, what's possible, but don't be frightened, alarmed if you end up on the next scheme, because I think you may get a positive outcome.
Thank you, Paul. David, what was your takeaway?
And I think it's very good, and I think it's a really actually been a really interesting session. Some great questions, and also, may I say, some great answers there, Jeffrey, as well, and very thorough, which I think is really useful. I think the main thing is it is planning it as much as you can. One size doesn't fit all, and if NHR has gone or doesn't work or it's too late to do it, there's a lot of Portugal is a great country to live in, and B, also there's some perfectly good ways of investing money, taking income and looking after yourself. So NHR isn't the be all and end all, it's a nice thing, but it's actually look to plan yourself properly for going forward. So
thank you, David. And Jeffrey, I'll leave the last word to you.
Well, thanks, Steve. Not much to add to that, I have to say, after Paul and David's comments. I mean, I think really it is about looking before you leap, planning, as David has said, figuring out actually whether the NHR fits. If it doesn't fit, whether in fact the new program will fit for you. Just a reminder, if you have a residency card, if you have an EU passport, or indeed under the current legislation, if you have a valid residency visa, then it is possible still to apply. And if you have that valid residency visa under the draft, it's possible to apply until the 31st of March of next year. But then lifestyle reasons brought me to Portugal, long before there was any NHR program or incentivized programs. So I'm sure it will continue to attract, now that people have got the bug, it will continue to attract individuals, and I'm sure people like David will be able to help with that smooth landing when in terms of structuring your wealth.
Great, thank you for that. It just leads me to thank, obviously, you guys, the panelists, for your time and for your insight, and to obviously thank the audience for their engagement and obviously for staying with us. As I said, we've been inundated with questions. Apologies we couldn't get through to all of them, but we will review those questions and get back to you. As I said, we will host those on our website. Talking of our website, if you want to know anything more about Portugal Pathways, our next event, for example, is on the 28th of November, and we'll focus on investing and owning real estate in Portugal. Please visit our website, which is www.portugalpathways.io. And that just leaves me to say a big thank you again to everybody, and goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.